Good morning, River Rocks Church. My name's Don, and this morning we're going to be in the book of Mark, chapter 15, verses 6 through 11. The day that we're talking about in the scriptures is actually the day of the Passover feast. And early that morning, the Jewish leaders had brought Jesus before Pontius Pilate, and they had accused him of claiming to be the king of the Jews. The interesting thing was Jesus actually never claimed that. He did claim that he was the Son of God, and he claimed that he actually was God, but he never claimed that he was the King of the Jews. And it's ironic that the Jewish leaders are accusing him of this because they believe the Messiah actually would come as the King of the Jews and would deliver them from the oppression of the Romans. So they're actually accusing him of something that they wanted him to do, but he didn't do. And the reason they accused him of this was because this would have been treason against the Roman rulers, and it would have warranted the death penalty. And the Jews were not allowed to put anyone to death. So they're trying to use the Romans to put Jesus to death. And Pilate actually asked Jesus straightforward if he's the king of the Jews. The reply Jesus gave to Pilate was, "It is as you say." And that sounds to us like that would be a confession or an agreement, which should have just ended it right there and he would have been found guilty. But actually the meaning behind what he said, for the way we would have said it today, would have been, "You said it, not me." So he wasn't confessing, he's just saying that that's what they were accusing him of doing. And actually in the book of John, or the Gospel of John, there's a longer conversation recorded between Pilate and Jesus, and there Jesus told him that his kingdom was not of this earth. And so therefore he was no threat to Rome or Pilate. And Pilate can't find any fault in him, nothing to warrant the death penalty. And Pilate finds out that he's actually Galilean, so he sends him to Herod, who happens to be in Jerusalem at the time. And Herod is the ruler over Galilee. Now Herod questions him, and Jesus refuses to answer any of his questions. So what Herod does is he mocks him, he beats him, but he then sends him back to Pilate because he can't find anything that would deserve the death penalty either. And that's where we pick up the verses today. Now it's the time of the feast later on in the day. And verse 6 says, "Now at the feast, he was accustomed to releasing one prisoner to them," speaking of Pontius Pilate, "whomever they requested. And there was one named Barabbas, who was chained with his fellow rebels. They had committed murder in the rebellion. Then the multitude, crying aloud, began to ask him to do just as he had always done for them. But Pilate answered them, saying, 'Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?' For he knew that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd so that he should release Barabbas to them." So either Pilate or Jesus can find him guilty of anything, and Pilate does not really want to put an innocent man to death. And he has a custom of releasing one person who was found guilty of a capital crime each year at the Passover. And I looked this up, and there's actually was a Roman law at the time that allowed for this to happen. A person convicted of a capital crime, except for high treason, could have been released if a crowd demanded it. And the Jewish high priests are really having none of this. They don't want Jesus released, so they stir up the crowd and they demand that Barabbas be released, who's a murderer, instead of Jesus, who's actually innocent. Ultimately, Pilate caves into this because he's afraid that there might be a revolt because the crowd's getting really stirred up. So he ends up releasing Barabbas just to appease the crowd. Now, there's a lot of things that we can learn in these scriptures, but there's one thing that I want to highlight because it's relevant to us today and it's incredibly important, and that's envy and jealousy. Envy and jealousy can lead people to do incredibly wicked things. It ultimately stems from pride, and it can lead us into just about every type of sin. Now, for the Jewish religious leaders, because of their envy, it caused them to lie. They had actually bore false witness against Jesus. It caused them to be angry and bitter, which eventually led to hatred of Jesus and finally to murder. They may have not have been the ones to actually murder him by putting him on the cross, but they used the Romans to do that for them. And we as believers, we're not immune to pride. We're not immune to envy and jealousy either. We still have a battle with the flesh. Throughout the New Testament scriptures, we're also warned about all types of sin, including pride, envy, jealousy, anger, and malice. and we must guard our hearts against these types of sins and things. We can do this by walking according to the Spirit that dwells within us. We need to humble ourselves. We must choose to put the Lord and others before ourselves. That's one way that we can remain humble. And one last thing that I wanted to bring up, and this should actually help us to stay humble. Jesus died in the place of Barabbas, who was a murderer. He also died for each and every one of us. We may not be an actual murderer, but Jesus said if we hate somebody, it's actually murder in our hearts. And we've all broken God's laws in one way or another, and we all deserve the death penalty. But when we repented of our old lives and we trusted in Jesus, we also were pardoned from the death penalty. And that's something to rejoice in. And it's also to remind us that we only have eternal life because of the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And how can we allow envy to gain a foothold in our hearts? And I hope this message has blessed you. And I hope you guys have a wonderful and a blessed day. We'll hope to see you soon. Bye.